what we're going to do kind of beginning next week is I'm still gonna be giving you required reading and notes from the book. But when we meet together and I talk, I'm going to be talking about the concepts of big things. Did that make sense? So you're still going to be reading and doing the comp checks because we need grades. But for your understanding moving forward, we're going to start talking about industrialization, colonization, and it's my hope that before the year ends, we're going to talk about World War I and World War II, because the world that we live in today is, hey, Ben, you're supposed to be with Miss Moore right now, my guy. See you later. So if what you're hearing from me is not matching up with the book, that's why. So just a quick recap. Last time we were talking about history, we were talking about what famous English king. Does anybody remember the famous English king? Lucy, who was it?
King Henry VIII.
King Henry VIII. Now, what, Lucy, is King Henry VIII most known for?
Changing the Church of England.
Yes. Yep.
But he also had 6 wives.
Yeah. So those are the two things that he's known for, exactly right. Having all these wives and changing the Church of England. And why did he leave the Catholic Church and create the Church of England? Kezia? Go ahead, Kezia.
To divorce his first wife.
Mm-hmm. He wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn, the young hot woman at his court. And why did he want to do that? I mean, I didn't touch on this. Henry VIII had already hooked up with Anne Boleyn's sister and had a child with Anne Boleyn's sister. So he could have just, if it was only about what he wanted or what he was feeling, I'm dancing around the subject here. But why does he want to marry Anne Boleyn? Lucy, sorry, I didn't call on you.
Because he can't just have an affair because he'll get caught and then that'll reflect bad on him. So He wants to have a son because then she would be the queen and then they would basically be king and queen and she would have the royal hair.
Boom. That's the key part. So Henry VIII, and in fact almost every king, had kids out of wedlock. Like I've talked about before, that was kind of one of the perks. You'd be the king, if you lose, somebody could assassinate you or poison you, but there are big perks that come with being the king. You get all the money, you get all the land, you get fancy clothes, and you get your pick of women because, unfortunately, women were treated like objects back then. And so he was already doing that. But the difference is you can only make a prince or a princess with the queen. So any kids he had out of wedlock did not count. They were just nobodies. So he has to marry Anne to make it legitimate. So that's why he does it. But the Anglican Church is essentially the Catholic Church. They just change who's in charge. So that doesn't make Catholics happy, obviously, because they split from the Catholic Church. But it also doesn't make most Protestants happy. Why not? If he just switches who's at top, why doesn't that make the Protestants happy? Kingston?
Because it's you can't switch the rules to make yourself benefit and be obviously on the top.
Yeah. And if you're a real true Protestant who was willing to put your life on the line for your beliefs, you're like somebody like Martin Luther, and then Henry VIII is like, oh, I'm also a Protestant, just so he can divorce his wife, How does that make those real Protestants feel? Lucy?
Kind of like they don't really matter, in that it's more like a joke to him, and that he can just switch however he wants.
Yeah, he's not taking it seriously. I remember when I was in high school, I felt really strongly about like my music, and like, you know, all the rest of the kids were listening to Backstreet Boys, but I knew what was really good music, right? Obviously, you know, teenagers. But and then somebody would be like, "Oh, I also like that," and I'd be like, "You're just a poser, man. You're posing. You don't really like the real music," right? So for the Protestants, they felt like he doesn't care about Protestantism. He's just trying to divorce this lady. So he didn't make either side happy. Now, Henry VIII gets old and dies. That's what happens. Does anybody remember who becomes king after him? Kingston?
It was a queen. It was a queen.
Good guess. We're going to get to the queens in a second. Who becomes king after him? Kezia? Do you remember, Kezia? I think, sorry, you're breaking up. Yeah, his son, who is Edward VI, who he has with his third wife. But Edward VI has a problem. Anybody remember what it is? Lucy?
He's a very sickly boy.
He's a very sickly
And
boy.
he's constantly like weak.
Yeah, and so I feel kind of scandalous. My younger sister has 4 daughters, and they are so cute. I love them. Like, I get videos and pictures while we're in all this, and I miss them so much. But they have allergies. They have peanut allergies. They have gluten allergies. And so she has to be very careful about what she gives them. If they have peanuts, like, they need an EpiPen injection or they will die, right? Luckily, we have all that medicine. If we lived in Henry VIII's time and you had a peanut allergy, or you were gluten intolerant, what would that most likely mean for you? Kingston?
You would have to learn the hard way.
Yeah, which would probably mean that you would die. Today in modern medicine, if there's a child who's premature, or if there's a child who's born with a heart condition or something, we have medicine and facilities that we can help those people along, right? But if you were born premature, if you had some blood disease or something, it was a wrap. That was just the end for you, which was very sad, but that's how life was. So Edward VI is already sick, and people are not sure how long he's going to be able to reign. But because he is sick, he is extremely devout. He is a hardcore Protestant because he knows he's going to die soon. And so that makes him very worried about what happens when you die, right? You know, when you're a young person and you don't think about it's easy to not care about your beliefs. But if something serious happens, everybody starts praying, right? And so Edward starts to push England more towards the Protestant religion because he feels very strongly about it. He becomes king when he's 9, and unfortunately he's dead by 16. And when he dies, who becomes the next ruler? Kingston?
King James.
Nope, we're not. Edward VI dies, and who becomes Noah?
His oldest daughter.
His older sister, or Henry VIII's oldest daughter. Do you remember her name?
Elizabeth?
We're going to get to her in a moment. Her older sister is named what, Lucy?
Mary.
Mary the First. Now, whose daughter is Mary? Do you remember? He's Henry's daughter, obviously, but do you remember who the mom's name, Lucy?
Anne of Cleve?
No, that's the fourth one.
One of the Annes.
It's a good guess. Noah?
Catherine.
It's Catherine, the first wife. And Catherine is the devout Spanish Catholic wife. And she was also the one that was divorced and just been like, all right, you live in a convent now. And she writes letters to Henry saying, you know, we loved each other. We were married faithfully and happily for 17 years. Well, she was faithful, he wasn't, but, and she writes letters, please don't do this to me. Don't just kick me to the side and disgrace me in front of all of the world. And he's like, yeah, well, goodbye. And so his daughter, Mary, never forgets that. So she sees what happens to her mother. She's a relatively young person. She'd probably be about your guys' age, maybe in her teens. Sees her family split apart by this woman, Anne Boleyn. Her mom is put on trial. And it's not only that she got a divorce, they put her on trial and find her guilty of well, it's a little bit gossipy, but so Catherine was married before Henry. Henry had an older brother. We kind of skipped through this, but we got a little time right now. Henry VIII had an older brother. His father, Henry VII, had 2 sons. They call that an heir and a spare. The heir was Henry's older brother, Arthur, like King Arthur. And Henry was never supposed to be king. He was just the spare. And so Arthur is 15 when he gets married to Catherine. Henry is 12 at this time. And Arthur's a young man. He's 15. But people got married earlier back then. Catherine is 18. And Arthur is 18, or is 15. And Henry is 12. And the kings of Spain and England are trying to match their kids up for political alliances, right? People didn't get married because, oh my goodness, he's so funny and I just get lost in his eyes. It was a political thing. And so Henry VII very much wants his son to marry the daughter of the king of Spain because the king of Spain is wealthy. And when a boy and a girl would get married, the father of the bride was expected to give a gift called a dowry. And this wasn't like a bread machine or like a coffee maker that you put on your wedding registry at Target. They're talking about millions of dollars. And so if the marriage goes through, England stands to gain a lot of power and a lot of money. And so Arthur and Catherine get married. This is going to get a little cringy. Try and stay with me. So Arthur and Catherine get married. Now, in medieval Europe, marriage was, it was kind of like a contract, right? There was still, kiss the bride, that kind of stuff, rings and all that. But it was if the king and queen are getting married, that is a government function. So Arthur and Catherine get married. And that night is the wedding night, right? And so it's expected that the newlyweds will kind of do what they're supposed to do. We're not going to talk about that. But obviously they close the doors, and the next day Arthur comes out and he's talking to everybody, and everybody's like, so how did it go? And he's like, yeah, great, awesome. Sorry, my phone's saying, this is good, great, awesome. And so everybody's happy. They're newlyweds. They're young people. Soon there'll be a prince being born. Everything's happy. But 2 weeks after Arthur gets married to Catherine, he gets sick. He gets real sick. He gets a flu, 103 degrees. And people are freaking the freak out because they just put all of this time, this money, this energy, the contracts, everything. And Arthur gets sick and is dead within 3 weeks of getting married. And everything is going to heck in a handbasket. Henry VII is freaking out because his son just died, but also the political alliance and all of that money, the money, they're going to lose all the money. So what are they going to do? Now, there's a couple problems here. Do they just ship Catherine back with all the money? Or does she become a widow for the rest of her life? She's 18. What are they going to do? Somebody comes up with a plan and they say, well, in the Bible, it says that if your brother dies and leaves his wife a widow, and you are unmarried, it is your duty, it says this legitimately in the Old Testament, to marry your brother's widow and take care of her. And so, since they were young and the marriage was never consummated because he was just 15, Catherine will just marry Henry. And it'll be like Arthur never even happened. And so they handshake the deal. The thing, they still get the money. Arthur's just kind of buried quietly, and Henry marries Catherine. And nobody talks about it until 25 years later, when Henry wants to get a divorce. Maybe not, it's like 20 years. Henry wants to get a divorce, and he uses the whole situation of how to get rid of this. He says he wants a divorce, Pope won't give it to him. And he says, this marriage was born out of sin, because the Bible says that you should never covet your neighbor's wife, or you should never be with your brother's wife. It does also say that in another part of the Mosaic law. It's all depending on when your brother dies and how all of that. But so, to add insult to injury, they bring Catherine in front of the court and say, isn't it true that you consummated your relationship with Arthur? Imagine being the queen and sitting in front of everybody, and they're asking about your marriage night and gossip at who did what now. So not only is she divorced, and not only is she kicked to the curb, but it's very insulting in the way that she does, in the way that they do it. Did you all get that? And so the Spanish government, Catherine and Mary, do not forget this slap in the face. It would have been bad enough had they divorced Catherine, right? That would have been insulting in and of itself. But to do it the way that they did, to say that, you know, she's basically just hooking up with all these brothers, is shady and it's demeaning. And so when Mary becomes queen, she has not forgotten what happened to her mother. Did you get that? So she's got a list of people that she's going for. Now her father's already dead, and a lot of those other guys. But anybody who was still alive that was on that trial to get rid of her mom, gone. Treason, 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 treason. Everybody gets their head chopped off. And that's why she gets called Bloody Mary. But you can kind of see things from her point of view, can't you? Right? Imagine that your mom was treated like that and just kicked to the curb so that people could get money. And then you finally got the power. Now you've got the money. Now you've got everything. So Mary tries to push things back to Catholicism. Unfortunately for Mary, she also gets sick and dies. And when she dies, who becomes the next ruler of England? Noah?
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth I. And Elizabeth is the daughter of Henry and whom else? Kingston? Sorry, go ahead, Kingston.
It was
Who?
who got divorced with him.
No, who's the mother of Elizabeth I?
Oh,
Her name is Anne Boleyn. You should try and remember this. It's going to be like in every history class you take. Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn is his second wife. Henry only has kids with his first three wives. He has Mary with Catherine, he has Elizabeth with Anne, and he has Edward with Jane, the first Jane. Everybody kind of clear on that? So Elizabeth becomes queen. And Elizabeth knows that everybody wants her to get married so that there can be a king and queen, because people didn't believe that a woman could rule by herself. They honestly didn't think it was like, you're just going to have this lady? Like, what is she, you know, what happens when she gets hysterical? How is she going to think rationally? This is how people actually thought. So they want her to get married. But Elizabeth doesn't want to get married. Why? Anybody get Noah?
She wants to take over the kingdom by herself.
She wants to rule, and she knows that if she gets married, what's going to happen? Lucy?
All that power is instantly taken away from her.
And goes to the king, right? She knows that if she gets married, she will basically become a baby machine again. That's basically what the queen's job was, to give birth to the next king or queen. And so she knows that's not going to happen. So she never has any kids because she never gets married. And so they call her the Virgin Queen. And during her time, England starts to expand. She's a very good queen. She's the first English monarch to send ships to America. And those ships establish the first colony, the first English colony anywhere in the world. Do you remember what the colony they found is called? Noah, you're on fire today. What is it?
Jamestown?
Good guess? No. It's not a single place. It's like a big place. And it's named after her. I'll just tell you because we're running out of time. It's called Virginia, right? The Virginia Company. Did you ever see that Pocahontas movie? Go, because it's gold, boys, gold. Then the Virginia colony, right? She's the Virgin Queen. It's Virginia. All right. Anyways, she does a lot of good things. Also, we have story for one more bit of juicy gossip. The Spanish at this point have basically are running America. They have all of modern day Mexico and South America besides Brazil. Every country in South America speaks Spanish except for Brazil. Does anybody know what language Brazil speaks? Noah, sorry.
Portuguese.
Portuguese, right? I can't understand a word Portuguese. But so, and in Mexico at the time it was called New Spain, Peru, Colombia, all of these places have gold and silver deposits that were the richest in the world. And so Spain is shipping back gold literally by the boatload. They are getting fabulously wealthy. And the English want some of that action. But they don't have the naval power yet to challenge Spain. So Elizabeth comes up with a cunning plot. She was going to use pirates. But since they're fighting for the English government, they're called privateers. They're given a letter of marque, which means that they can steal stuff. They just have to give Elizabeth a cut. So imagine if, like, the United States government starts robbing banks in Canada, but if whatever you get, you have to give 80% to the government. So, you know, Mr. Fraser robs the Bank of Canada and I get $1 million robbing those poor Canadians. I got to give 800,000 to the president and I keep 200,000. That's basically the deal Elizabeth had with these pirates. So she would send guys like Sir Francis Drake, who would go to the Caribbean, Pirates of the Caribbean, and he would raid Spanish ships as they came back from Mexico. He would kick it on Jamaica, and he would raid the ships, steal the gold, then go back to England and give Elizabeth 80% of it, and then he would keep the rest. How do you think the Spanish felt about that? Kingston?
They liked it.
They liked it?
I mean, they didn't like
They
it.
didn't. They didn't like it.
Too much money.
Right? They didn't like it. They were muy enojado because it's piracy. The English are stealing their gold and then pretending like nothing is happening. And they're already upset because of the whole thing that went down with Catherine of Aragon and Mary I. So Spain is extremely upset. They already didn't like the English. Xavier, you are killing me, bro. They already didn't like the English because of the divorce and all of that. But now, English pirates are stealing their stuff. So on Monday, we're going to talk about the Spanish Armada and Spain's attempt to destroy England once and for all.